Hello and welcome to UKPF Extra. In this episode, I would like to examine the story of the Greada Treaty. This topic is a controversial one. It is essentially a conspiracy theory, but it is an important one. If the general thrust of this particular theory were true, it would be the central plank between modern UFO activity and theories around a secret government operating without constraint and pulling the strings of governments and people all around the world. Some viewers of this video may have a general idea what the Greada Treaty is and where this video may be going, but for those that don't, in a nutshell, the Greada Treaty is the name of the alleged treaty signed between US President Dwight Eisenhower and an alien power back in the 1950s. But before we get into it, a few caveats. As this is a conspiracy theory, there is very little in the way of actual evidence that proves this all out. There is some purported evidence, which is by no means conclusive, but mostly we are relying on the say-so of a small number of eyewitnesses and of a few other people who claim to have found evidence or documentation supporting this story whilst working for the US government, and then subsequently decided to come forward. And those people we shall group together and refer to as whistleblowers. Some of those people are relatively well known in the UFO community, and opinions on their trustworthiness and accuracy vary. Suspicion runs deep in the UFO community, and it is equally plausible that this story is true as it is that various people have contrived the events of this story as a way to either mislead the UFO community or simply sell tickets to speaking events and flog self-published books. In any event, if you're new to this story and decide to go research it for yourself after listening to this video, you will discover a few things. Despite some broad agreement on the general basics of this story, many of the supposed leakers and eyewitnesses have differences in their accounts about some of the timings and locations of key events. If you really dig around, there are quite a few sites that go into some detail about this story, but many will use it to lead to other events and theories, some of which are easily debunked and or clearly fantasy. I guess I'm just warning that this is a story with a lot of rabbit holes. That's why it's a useful conspiracy theory, because it lends to no end of spin-off theories. In this episode, I want to try and bring forward a relatively concise version of the alleged story of the Greada Treaty. In doing so, I'll acknowledge up front, there will be other websites and videos that have a slightly different take. As I've said, each source tells their own story, slightly differently, and some may take issue with my rendition. Anyway, the story goes like this. Back in 1954, the President of the United States was Dwight D. Eisenhower, having taken office in the year prior. In February of '54, it was announced the President was to take a winter vacation to Palm Springs for the week of the 17th through the 24th. Some political commentators noted that this vacation seemed hastily arranged, and it was peculiar as it followed only about a week after a different vacation where the President was said to have gone quail hunting in Georgia. Anyway, stunningly, on the evening of Saturday the 20th of February, President Eisenhower went missing. The precise situation of how this came to light on that evening is not clear, but the knowledge that the President's location was unknown sparked a brief press frenzy. The media questioned if the President had been taken ill, if he had perhaps died, or there was some breach of security. These were all valid questions in the situation that should have been easily answered by one of the many staffers of the office of the most well-protected and well-documented politician in the world. Within a few hours, the President's press secretary announced that the President had lost a tooth cap whilst eating fried chicken and had been rushed to a local dentist for emergency treatment. The frenzy cooled off just before the innuendo became international headlines. Proponents of the theory that we're exploring in this episode believe that the fried chicken story was a cover-up for the president's real activities that evening. They say that the trip to Palm Springs itself was contrived to put the president on the West Coast, and that on the evening of the 20th of February 1954, President Eisenhower was not at the dentist, but he was instead at Muroc Airfield, which was later renamed Edwards Air Force Base, and that the purpose of his secretive trip there was to meet with aliens and conduct first contact. And not just this, but that the president held 3 meetings with aliens in close succession. Before we get to the details of those specific meetings, we need to look at William Cooper's account. He says the story begins as follows. In 1953, astronomers discovered large objects in space which were moving towards the Earth. It was first believed that they were asteroids. Later evidence proved that the objects could only be spaceships. Project Sigma intercepted alien radio communications. When the objects reached the Earth, they took up a very high orbit around the equator. There were several huge ships, and their actual intent was unknown. Project Sigma and a new project, Plato, through radio communications using computer binary language, was able to arrange a landing that resulted in face-to-face contact with alien beings from another planet. Project Plato was tasked with establishing diplomatic relations with this race of space aliens. The ships that were in orbit were said to be the aliens that we know as the Greys, or the Zeta Reticulans. It seems they were making a good show of approaching the Earth, and according to this story, made it possible that the US was able to decipher sufficient information to detect their approach and open up a dialogue, and to request a face-to-face meeting. However, that meeting was not the meeting that took place on the 20th of February 1954. Instead, the president met with a different race of aliens, the kind we commonly refer to as the Nordics. At this alleged first contact meeting, President Eisenhower was warned that the approaching ships were of the race that we know as the Greys, and they warned the president not to align with them in any way. The Nordics are said to have asked the president to begin a program of nuclear disarmament. They demanded that humans stop polluting the Earth and pillaging its natural resources. They explained that humans are incapable of spiritually managing or coping with the nuclear technologies we had harnessed, and that we don't realise the damage we had done and will continue to do. They further warned against other alien races. These Nordics claimed that they wanted to help humanity with our spiritual development, and if we accepted the sacrifices set out, with their assistance, they would help humanity to evolve spiritually, so that we could live in harmony with one another. The final detail we think we know of this supposed first meeting was that the Nordics, when asked by President Eisenhower, stated that they were not prepared to share any technology that could be repurposed and used in any way as a weapon, as they surmised we would surely weaponize any such gift. An alleged witness to the meeting was Charles Suggs, who was an Air Force commander on the base. His son, also Charles, is said to have been quoted on his father's meeting. Charlie's father, Navy Commander Charles Suggs, accompanied President Ike along with others on February 20th. They met and spoke with 2 white-haired Nordics that had pale blue eyes and colourless lips. The spokesman stood a number of feet away from the president and would not let him approach any closer. A second Nordic stood on the extended ramp of a biconvex saucer that stood on a tripod landing gear on the landing strip. According to Charlie, there were B-58 Hustlers on the field, even though the first one did not fly officially until 1956. These visitors said they came from another solar system. They posed detailed questions about our nuclear testing. Another witness said to be present was John Lear, a jet test pilot who held 18 world speed records and later worked for the CIA. His son William Lear would later go on to create the famous Lear jet and would be a vocal proponent of the first contact meeting. All witnesses which have come forward to the first contact meeting have said that the president essentially spurned the Nordics at this first meeting. The president could not conceive of any possible way he could sanction the US giving up their nuclear deterrent, if only for the reason that, in what must have been a reality-altering set of circumstances, this was potentially their chief weapon of defence against a possible new enemy, one from another world, and clearly more technologically advanced than any nation on Earth. We must remember that President Eisenhower had led the Allies in their effort to prevail in Europe during World War II, not even a decade removed from this alleged first contact event. The Cold War was heating up, and the arms race was well and truly on, and if all was as it now seemed, there was a potential new threat to be analysed coming from outer space. The five-star general come president was not going to hand over their chief weapon of defence. Add to this the clear unwillingness on behalf of the requesters to share advanced technology, the president was suspicious of the overtures, the one-sided nature of the request, and so he rejected it. At some point in later 1954, not too long after this first meeting, but at a date not universally agreed on, the aliens who had been orbiting the equator agreed to meet face to face and landed at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. This time, President Eisenhower came face to face with the race of aliens we popularly know as the Greys. It is alleged that the landing of their saucer and the initial part of the meeting was recorded on videotape by the United States Air Force, and that in the 1970s, an effort from a whistleblower sought, unsuccessfully, to leak the footage. These aliens identified their home planet as being in the constellation of Orion, and stated that their world was dying, and at some unspecified point in the future, they would no longer be able to survive there. The President and the Greys met for 2 meetings on separate days, and a basic agreement was reached. It is alleged that some of those details include: humans would not interfere with the Greys' activity on Earth, and in turn, the Greys would not interfere with humans, with some exceptions. There was to be no public discourse of the alien presence on Earth, nor of the agreement made, and efforts would be made to ensure it remained a secret. The Greys agreed only to deal with the US and make no other agreements with any other government on Earth. The US likewise agreed to not make any agreements with any other alien race. The US government was to create a control group to ensure the terms of the treaty were met and to advise on human-alien relations. This group was known as Majestic 12. The Greys would be allowed to abduct limited numbers of human beings for limited periods of time, for the purpose of conducting experiments, to study humans, and to extract enzymes and key biological materials. The human abductions were to be done in secret, with the abductee returned to the place they were taken from and retain no memory of the event. The Greys were to provide a list of the identities of abductees on a regularly scheduled basis to Majestic 12. There was an established limit on the number of human abductions in a given period of time. The US would receive advanced technology, and the Greys would assist with technological advancement. There is some suggestion from whistleblowers that there was some duress involved in the agreement, but of course there are varying viewpoints on this. I'm sure there will be people who, with the benefit of 7 decades of hindsight, would be reflecting on the Nordics offer and wondering why on earth the president didn't go back to them. Some other people might be more understanding of the decision and have an appreciation for the geopolitical situation, and how unknown the danger from any of these visiting alien races would prove to be. Colonel Philip Corso, a highly decorated officer that served in Eisenhower's National Security Council, was allegedly quoted as stating, "We had negotiated a kind of surrender with them, ETs, as long as we couldn't fight them. They dictated the terms because they knew what we most feared was disclosure." And if that quote is as true as the rest of the story, then it probably paints a good picture of the logic in play, and that President Eisenhower probably viewed that a bad deal was better than no deal at all. If we return to some of the whistleblower sources, it apparently didn't take long for the US and Majestic 12 to realise that the Greys were not honouring the terms of the treaty. Bill Cooper stated, "By 1955, it became obvious that the aliens had deceived Eisenhower and had broken the Greada Treaty. It was suspected that the aliens were not submitting a complete list of human contacts and abductees to the Majestic 12, and it was suspected that not all abductees had been returned." Leah is also alleged to have been quoted as stating, "A deal was struck that in exchange for advanced technology from the aliens, we would allow them to abduct a very small number of persons, and we would periodically be given a list of those persons abducted. We got something less than the technology we bargained for, and found the abductions exceeded by 1,000,000-fold than what we had naively agreed to." There was potentially a very famous semi-public quote that is attributed to General Douglas MacArthur given at West Point in 1955. I say potentially, as modern fact-checkers state that there was no record of the speech, so I caveat that, much like the rest of this episode, the veracity of much of what is being discussed, including this quote, must not be taken without question. Anyway, the General is alleged to have stated to West Point students, "You now face a new world, a world of change. We speak in strange terms of harnessing the cosmic energy, of ultimate conflict between a united human race and the sinister forces of some other planetary galaxy. The nations of the world will have to unite, for the next war will be an interplanetary war. The nations of the Earth must someday make a common front against attack from people from other planets." A quick perusal of General MacArthur's public remarks show he was someone not given to show any weakness or compromise to the USSR, to China, or to the spread of communism, and so the very notion of uniting all nations in such a common endeavour would have been, in my estimation, very out of character, or only brought about by some reality-altering new paradigm of thinking. No such change is obviously evident in the limited snippets from after 1955 that I have reviewed, though many remarks state he felt very highly of West Point and would visit there often. Many of the whistleblower statements and general alien abduction law points to the alien abductions becoming more and more common in the years following these alleged meetings. It is noted by UFO researchers that there was a trend in the 1950s for abduction stories to feature space brothers and sisters. These were encounter stories that were generally friendly and went along the lines of, "Come take a ride in my spaceship." By the 1960s, the majority of encounters being reported were much more intrusive and invasive, and people began to recount a more evil presence and intentions. Medical procedures were performed without consent, and many reported recollection of grey aliens. There is a lot of evidence that also points towards an extensive effort on the part of the US military to contain and control UFO and alien abduction accounts. Enlisted personnel in all branches of the US military would be told to keep quiet about encounters and sightings, and whistleblowers and leakers would suffer from intimidation tactics, which in some cases caused endless damage to personal lives and mental health. At the start of this episode, I cautioned against rabbit holes, but you can link the story of the Greada Treaty to almost everything connected with modern UFO sightings and research. It provides a rationale as to why the US government has taken the position it had for so long. It fits neatly into the theories of a shadow government, some theories extending all the way along to the Illuminati, and of the role of such groups as the Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission and CFR, or Council for Foreign Relations. The Greada theory can be extended even further to the alleged secretive Men in Black, who seem to turn up after encounters and sightings and usually offer direct threats to witnesses to stay quiet. Some people theorise that some of these agents may be alien themselves or human-alien hybrids. When you look at the Bob Lazar story, he states that the military were trying to figure out these UFOs, and that there were at least a dozen of them, and he had no idea where most of them came from. Were these the spoils of Eisenhower's deal with the Zeta Reticulans? The technology exchanged for human torment and suffering? The Greada Treaty goes some way to explaining the modern alien abduction phenomenon, and why so many people recall very similar abduction events. It also feeds other UFO theories, such as that the aliens are building a presence here on Earth in underground and submerged locations. The Dulce Base incident story feeds directly from the Greada Treaty theory. That could and very well might warrant an episode of its own. If you are not familiar, it is alleged that there is or was a base in Dulce, New Mexico, where humans and grey aliens were working together. At some point in 1975, a human delegation discovered the Greys had built a massive underground base there, and a Delta team was sent in to explore it. Only, the Greys weren't too happy with that. When the Greys approached the Delta team, one soldier drew his sidearm, prompting the Grey to attack, and the two forces engaged in a brief firefight. Except, the Zeta Reticulans don't use Earth guns. They were armed with some kind of plasma weapons, and very quickly, a mix of 60 US Deltas and unarmed scientists were all killed. All of this leads me to modern events and the recent UAP report delivered to the Senate. This latest push for disclosure has been interesting. If the Greada Treaty story we have covered in this episode were mostly true, and there was, or is, an agreement between the US and the Greys, then it perhaps provides a lens through which to observe current events in an appropriate context. This leads me to ask, how and why did the Senate authorise such a report in the first place, if Majestic 12 and the terms of Greada are paramount? Has the supposed secret government now diverged from the publicly recognisable US government so far that any interoperability between the two effectively has been severed? Or is this some Machiavellian strategy, whereby the activities of the last 60 or 70 years get whitewashed forever, perhaps in lieu of a more public first contact event? Might we find that, if we follow precisely the correct rabbit holes, we actually end up in the fox's den? There are a series of questions I am left with, but before I get to those, I would like to ask you to click the like button if you have enjoyed this video. If you would like to let me know what you think about the Greada Treaty, a deal with aliens and or the Men in Black, then please do leave me a comment down below. And if you haven't already, please click the red button to subscribe to the channel and turn on all notifications via the bell icon. What if the events in this episode were substantively true? What if alien forces ultimately do not care that the President of the USA had no legal, moral, or theological authority to bind you or me to such a treaty? What if the modern alien abduction phenomenon and reports of experimentation is true? What if aliens have been studying us, cataloguing us, and figuring out our strengths and weaknesses for many years now? What if a secretive cabal of individuals truly do run our world, but are hidden in the shadows and protected by forces that no single individual could ever hope to overcome? What if you pay your taxes through your hard labour, and those funds are being used as a means of keeping you in a position of permanent indentured servitude? What if those same forces conspire to restrict humanity's spiritual growth and development? What if, through meditation and/or prayer, we are not so far from a great leap of spiritual advancement, but we just don't realise it? What if forces on and off world do not want that to happen? What if everything we think we know and understand about our existence is a deliberate and calculated lie? What if the men in black truly are active and, by any means necessary, are deployed regularly to subvert knowledge of the Zeta's presence on Earth? What if the so-called whistleblowers, who have died in suspicious and irregular circumstances, were murdered in an effort to silence the truth from being revealed? What if President Eisenhower made a big mistake in rebuking the Nordics? What if a small number of humans have been purposefully and consciously willing to work with alien forces and against the rest of humanity to effect a secretive and ultimately lethal agenda? What if the Nordics are essentially the angels from our Earth religions, and the Greys, who we are now aligned with, are actually agents of the devil? What if the Nordics and the Greys were essentially two sides of the same coin, and the differing overtures were part of a single plan? What if the Zeta Reticulan's world really is dying? What if they have identified Earth as their new home? What if aliens have been establishing underground and underwater bases here for the last 7 decades? What if, per recent video disclosures, they are getting upset about US military exercises in the vicinity of such bases, and are now more willing to show themselves in an effort to divert US boats and planes from areas they are active? What if the Zetas decide they would like to come out from their hidden bases, now or soon, and humanity is in their way? What are their intentions towards humans and our planet? What if they decide they don't want humans around on Earth anymore? What if they have already made that decision? Finally, what if all that I had left to say was, thanks very much for watching.